All right. Good morning, class. Mr. Toss here again. Here with Judge Kendall, Mr. Kendall's wife, the one I had been trying to bring into class. So I'm gonna give some time for her to briefly introduce herself, and then we'll begin with some of your guys' questions.
Okay, thanks, John. Oh, we were all set to come, everyone, on Monday, believe it or not, the day that was your first day off. So here, I'm Virginia Kendall. I am a federal district court judge. And what that means is that I was appointed by the president 15 years ago to serve in the Northern District of Illinois. And the Northern District of Illinois is the top 18 counties of the state of Illinois. So we go all the way up to the border and we go all the way down to about LaSalle County. I'm at the trial level. That's what a district court is called in the federal system. And then if you go one level up is a circuit. So we're in the Seventh Circuit, Federal Circuit of Appeals, and that covers Illinois and Wisconsin and Indiana. Although it's only 3 states, it's a big circuit because we have Chicago in there and a lot of cities in there. And before I was a federal prosecutor, before I was a federal judge, I was a federal prosecutor. And I was a federal prosecutor for about 10 and a half years. And when I was a federal prosecutor, I was a trial attorney and I tried about 50 different criminal trials. I also was the child exploitation coordinator for the Northern District of Illinois. And I also was the Project Safe Neighborhoods coordinator, which is the person who worked with locals to reduce gun violence in our area of the Northern District. And then before that, I was a federal judge's law clerk, which is kind of a low or a real lawyer, because when you graduate from law school, you become a lawyer. Some of the best jobs you can get, one of the best jobs, is to work as a law clerk. Sounds little, but it's actually as a lawyer to a judge. And so my whole career has been one long elevator ride in the federal building at Jackson Dearborn in Chicago.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate you taking the time and answering some of our questions.
No problem at all. I got the questions and I thought they were fantastic. So you're obviously training them well, John.
Good. Well, thank you. We're just about finished with our unit. They quiz tomorrow. So it was perfect timing.
Great.
Okay, our first question comes from Edwin, and he asks, what are some of the various responsibilities and duties of a federal judge, and how does your position differ from that of a Supreme Court justice?
Oh, fun. I wish I was a Supreme Court justice, but not there. Or should I say not there yet, Edwin? I don't know.
There we go.
Let's start with the differences. And I think it's really helpful at this point, don't mind that we talk a bit about the difference between a state court judge and a federal judge, because the majority of judges in the United States are state court judges. And the federal judges are judges of limited jurisdiction. Are you seeing me? I saw you for a second. You fine, John?
Yeah, I'm good.
Oh, good. Okay, sorry about that. So as a federal judge, I have a general docket, meaning that I, in one day, can have a criminal case and a patent case and a civil rights case, an employment case, all different kinds, as they're all linked to having federal jurisdiction. And federal jurisdiction comes out of federal laws. All right. So there's a whole body of civil rights law, and there's a whole body of anti-drug trafficking law that's federal. Okay. But I also have jurisdiction over diversity, meaning that if a citizen from one state sues a citizen of another state, and there's diversity of jurisdiction and it goes over $75,000, that also can give me jurisdiction. Okay. So what that means is that every day I have a really cool docket in that I'm bopping around a million different, federal topics. It also means that it's interesting and you've got to be super curious to be a federal judge, but it also means it's a ton of reading, because most state court judges are assigned to like a particular court. So there's like a traffic court judge or a divorce court judge or, a court of small claims, those types of things, right? And so they get very, very good at one area of law, and they see it over and over and over again. But federal judges, we see all these different areas of law, which makes my job super cool and super fun, but also a ton of reading, because it's not uncommon that I wake up one morning and I'm like, what is this law? I never even knew this existed. And most judges in the state system will know pretty much everything about their area of law. Me, I'll be like, wow, never knew that wasn't a federal law, and I have to learn it. So that's the main difference. Now, the difference between me and a Supreme Court judge is that I'm at the trial level, and then if you appeal my decision, you go to the appellate level where 3 judges sit and review my decision. And then if they appeal from the appellate section, it goes to the Supreme Court. And then you have to have the Supreme Court grant cert, meaning that they'll agree to hear the topic on appeal. And if they do, which is a really tiny, small percentage, then it goes to the Supreme Court. So the way position is kind of like a place, right? Imagine a referee on the ice rink or the basketball court. I'm the one making all of those calls, and then someone goes up for video review. That's the appellate court. And then the appellate court says, if there were another body, to say, well, one more body of video review. So sure. You can see where I'm kind of in the trenches, so to speak, of the battle. And then they are more in the academic review of my battle.
I see. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Our next question is one of the ones that I wrote. What do you find most rewarding, the most rewarding aspect of serving as a federal judge?
I have a few. I mean, the most rewarding is that you actually help people. There's people are coming to court to resolve some ugly things. Sometimes they feel they've been fired because they're, Black or Latino. Sometimes they feel that a police officer used excessive force on them. Sometimes they feel they've been harmed by a corporation with a contract. Sometimes they created an invention and somebody's trying to steal it. And so, they're coming to me to get help. And you can sense that it's really emotional for a lot of them. It's hard, it's like painful for them. And it's very comforting to know that I can give them some sense of getting their story heard and their case listened to. And sometimes it's not always in their favor, but a lot of times I find that just them having the opportunity to have someone listen to the whole thing can help. And I do try to settle cases too, not just have them go through full litigation. So that's probably the most fulfilling. The other really fulfilling part of my life in my job is that I have these very young people that work with me. The way that federal judges operate is that we hire these really bright young lawyers that come right out of law school or maybe a couple of years out of law school. And they're very passionate and they're very excited and they're very eager to do justice. And, it's beautiful to wake up every day and walk into a chambers with 3 young people that think like that. And then for us as a group to say, what's the right thing under justice right now to do? And that's pretty cool, right? Like I literally say with my clerks, like I'm sipping my coffee in chambers. And then I say to them, okay, kids, let's go do some justice. And we walk out into the courtroom, I mean, that's pretty cool, right? How many people get to do something like that? So that's very rewarding.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next question comes from Christina. Christina asks, as a federal judge has to be appointed by the president and approved by the Senate, how does that process work? And how does one get to the point of being appointed by the president?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that changes over time. And I don't know how much you've been reviewing our process right now, but right now it's been changing quite a bit. So I'll tell you my process, and then I'll tell you the way.
Yeah, yours is unique.
And so we had a what?
Oh, sorry. Your story is unique.
Right. I think it is. I think it is a little unique, yeah. So I was a federal prosecutor trying cases, and trying cases is a lot of work, and I had kids, and it was draining, and I loved my job, but at some point you have to move on, and you also. I think it's helpful also to think of cases differently. I was prosecuting all the time, so I was always putting people in jail as opposed to,
Hmm.
being a defense attorney or something else. So I was really kind of grappling with where to head. And I thought, boy, being a judge and being in the courtroom would be an awesome thing. How do I find out how to be one of those? And in our state of Illinois, a very cool thing occurred way back in the day. It was Paul Simon, who was our senator, a Democratic senator. He said, it would be really great if this wasn't so partisan. And the way that it normally works is this. Normally in the past, if the person in power is of one political party, he or she, I'm still holding out hope. He or she, he or she will turn to the highest ranking person that is the senator in his state and ask that senator to feed to him some nominees. Okay, so, for example, right when I back in the day, when I was there, Durbin was the lead senator,
Hmm.
and the second senator was Senator Obama, and then Hastert was the Speaker of the House. So the three most powerful people, because Hastert was from Illinois, those were the three people that were in power, so to speak, stateside. Now, notice that Hastert is the only Republican out of that group,
Hmm.
and Bush was in the White House. So normally Durbin wouldn't get a chance to say anything. It would come from Hastert and go to Bush. But before Bush, there was an agreement in Illinois that every fourth pick would be bipartisan, meaning that rather than turning to the Republican, if you're a Republican in the White House, you turn to the party that's not in power. So
Hmm.
Bush turned to Durbin and Obama. And Durbin and Obama selected three people. No, they selected, I think we were originally five people to interview
Hmm.
at the Capitol. And Hastert was there. It was Hastert, Obama, and Durbin. And then Durbin got to send two names to the White House. And he sent me and Gary Feinerman. And then Bush appointed me. Now, what this means is think of it this way. Right now, Trump's in power,
Hmm.
and Trump is turning to the Republicans in power for a Republican selection.
Hmm.
And Trump is an extremely conservative Republican and has unique ideology, and he's turning to people to give him that unique ideology. And he's not respecting that agreement that Illinois had. Okay.
Okay.
So that means every person that he picks is going to be ideologically aligned
Hmm.
if he can be approved by the Senate, right? And where is the Senate right now? A Republican majority.
Hmm.
You see this. So the year that I was selected, they're looking to someone that Bush would say, well, she's not too liberal because I'll appoint her. And it's Durbin saying, well, we have to send someone that's not, we want someone like us, but not too conservative.
Hmm.
And so what happens with this bipartisan selection is the few of us that went through it, we're really middle of the road judges. Like we're
Hmm.
very mainstream. Like, and that's the way it should be. It should be that you're looking at the law and the facts and not at parties. Unfortunately, now we're looking at a lot of ideology being put on the bench. So if you've been reading in the papers, there's a really interesting New York Times article that came out just 2 days ago or 3 days ago,
Hmm.
and it reviews all of Trump's appointees, and all of his appointees show that I think it's like 90% were Federalist Society members. And the Federalist Society members are very conservative Republican nominees. So that's kind of the way that it's been playing out recently without any of this bipartisan selection. But after that happens, you do have to go get a vote before the Senate.
Hmm.
And so I was fortunate to get 100% vote before the Senate. And I think most of the people that went through bipartisan get that way because they're not the extreme people that one side or the other is saying, no, 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 she's not qualified or she's too ideologically bound. All right.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that this process is draining and exhausting because you fill out an application that is about 100 pages. You have to give them everything from your medical, you have to sign off and they can look at all your medical records. They go all the way back to when you were 18 years old. The FBI checks everybody that you lived with over those years. And then they ask that. So imagine going back to your freshman year in college and saying, hey, John, I don't know who your freshman buddy was. Hey, what was John like when he was a freshman? Did he drink? Did he use drugs? Did he discriminate against people?
Mm-hmm.
Did he treat women appropriately? Like, these are the questions they're asking. Did he support the United? These are the questions they're asking because they want people who are loyal and who are not going to discriminate. So, bottom line is that the process was there to make sure that only those who could be apolitical and not biased would be on the bench. Our code of conduct requires that we don't exercise politics. That's what our code of conduct does. That's not a state system. State's elected by a party. Federal system, you're supposed to be apolitical when you're on the bench. So kind of an interesting time we're in.
Mm-hmm. We did have a question yesterday during our review, kind of to go off script, but a student asked if judges can vote like in primaries, or can they vote in presidential elections? My assumption was that you can vote in a presidential election, probably not in a primary, because you'd be, a member of a party.
Yeah, it's an interesting question that hasn't been responded to by our Code of Conduct Committee directly. You have the right to vote, and because you have the right to vote, that we don't prohibit you from voting in a primary, but many of us do not, for that very reason, because we don't align to a political party, and we try very hard to send the message that we are not aligned to a political party. So since I've been a judge, I haven't voted in primaries, but I do vote. I'm allowed to support a particular candidate personally. I'm just not allowed to go to a rally or to a fundraiser or have a sign on my front lawn. And the funny ones are when we have judges who are married to people running for office or who have very strong spouses. Like, imagine if Mr. Kendall wanted to, put a pro particular candidate on the front lawn. I'd have to really say, dude, please don't. I'm not allowed to do that. And so it becomes kind of like a marital dispute.
Yeah.
Don't worry, he hasn't put any signs on the front lawn. He's been respectful of that.
Okay. Okay. Question 4. We recently have read Federal 78 from Hamilton, where he asserts his belief that judicial independence is necessary for the judicial branch to protect civil liberties. Do you believe that judicial independence is still possible today in such a partisan climate? So kind of related to what we were saying before.
Yeah, I do, and I'm working so hard on making it happen, because it's got to be from individual judges who are strong enough and brave enough to just continue entering their opinions in under the law, and you can see it happening. I mean, every time you have the president call out somebody for being a so-called judge, he's doing the political angle, but that judge was doing his job, right? Like, he didn't make the president happy, but that judge, did his job, right? So he's doing the judicial independence. I work all over the world, working on human trafficking and training judges and training them that judicial independence is the only way that we are going to have the rule of law maintained. Because if the people, like you and your students, think that, hey, Kendall is just going to decide it the way that, whoever put her on the bench. Let's say they think I'm just a Durbin person because Durbin and Obama selected me, right? If they think I'm going to decide their decision, if a Republican comes in and says, oh, she's just going to, rule against this statute or this proposal and find it unconstitutional because Durbin and Obama proposed it, right? Then what good is going to the court at all, right? And what we want people to do is we're encouraging them to go to an independent judiciary so that they can resolve these disputes. Because if they don't, and once they think I'm worthless, then they resolve them themselves. And how do you resolve them yourself? Hey, take out your gun and resolve it yourself. Right? I mean, this is like really a rule of law situation. And in countries where the rule of law is broken down, like in certain African countries where I teach, and they have, militia and attacking other militia, because no one has the faith that the judge that's in power is going to give an unbiased opinion. So I'm working currently with United Nations as the U.S. representative on the United Nations Judicial Integrity Network. Mm-hmm. And we're really working on maintaining respect for the judiciary across the world, across the globe. And we're really trying to rise above personal attacks on judges, because those personal attacks don't help. They just, they don't give support for the public to look at us as being people that are going to actually apply the facts to the law and try in their best way they can to get it right. Right. And that's what we're looking for. So he was right, and we really need to work towards it.
Certainly. Thank you. The next question, how do you see politics, especially in the judicial nomination process, affecting the federal judiciary? So my thought was here, referencing the nomination of Merrick Garland in 2016, how that was more political in terms of his being nominated by Obama, but then being held off on a vote until Trump was elected, and Gorsuch was appointed instead.
So the whole situation with the political nomination process that we're in right now is showing us a little bit of a different judiciary. I think that article might be a nice little, exercise to review. Mm-hmm. We saw a lot of younger judges being appointed in Trump's administration. The younger judges that were being appointed, some of them didn't have any judicial experience, and many of them didn't have a lot of experience, and they were being selected for different reasons, right? That can impact the way that the judiciary plays out. Many of them are qualified. Many of them are qualified, and they're capable, and they're able to, do their positions, and they're able to do their positions well. The politics of getting the judges to the bench is a disappointment from my perspective, because I personally think that the way that we did it in Illinois, where we try to work together, is probably the best way, right? It's rather than say, while you're in power, you get every single solitary opening. Well, that doesn't take into account that certain generations are going to be retiring, or certain generations had more appointed, or certain are leaving the bench, right? And so it turns out that there were a lot of appointments available to President Trump. And so that it just becomes a court that goes, kind of stacked one way, depending on who can get it. Mm-hmm. And the whole concept of what happened with Garland, it was both sides have played that card now since then. And, it's a disappointment, because there's some really talented people that get there. Another thing to think about for the students, think about our Supreme Court. They are all Harvard and Yale, period. Right? I mean, there's something to say about that. We are not all Harvard or Yale, and there's a lot of really bright people out there that come from state schools, or come from Jesuit schools, or come from other backgrounds that really are more diverse and more representative of the people. And wouldn't it be great for presidents to start thinking about finding those? How about finding a judge for the Supreme Court that has been focused not on private practice or appellate practice, mm-hmm. but has been focused on social practice, doing work in the community. I mean, we don't see that because it's not valued as being smart enough for our court. But we see it in other countries. We see it up in Canada. We see it in other countries. So there's a lot of ways that, by removing the political structure and focusing on a broader set of values, we could have a broader representation for our courts.
Sure. Next question comes from Valeria. Do you think that the Trump administration makes your job as a federal judge easier, harder, or is it not impacted at all?
It doesn't impact it. It doesn't impact it at all. Cases come in and I read them. And the only thing that's harder is your own personal views, So, if you like him, you're happy. If you don't, you're not. But it doesn't matter to my job. I just go about doing my business. It's not at all an impact. He doesn't impact me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, your job is to interpret laws and to, it doesn't change your ideology. Sure.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me.
Yeah. Next question comes from several students, Armani, Jennifer, Michelle, Martinez, and Christina again. When considering how you will decide the outcome of a case, what is your approach and process like? Do your personal ideologies or moral or political beliefs influence your decisions at all?
I don't think my politics do because it's not supposed to.
Yeah.
I think we are who we are. I think that the way that you were raised, the things that you value, I think that you view everything through different lenses. And that's why my previous answer was because as someone who grew up in Waukegan and is Latina and gets on the district court bench, which I hope happens to a Cristo Rey student soon, then that person's going to have a different understanding of, say, gun laws, right? Maybe, or of, I don't know, of drug laws, maybe. I don't know. It just depends on who you are. But the understanding is still going to be tied by the law. And, people always say to me, like, how do you make decisions? I mean, it must be so hard. The truth is, I just get as much information as possible. Whenever people are saying they're going through a hard decision, I ask them like 25 questions. And they say, I don't know. I say, well, get answers to those ones and let's regroup again. Because the more information you have, the better you are at decision making, right? And so, like, if you were making, let's say an immigration case, like I haven't had a big one of these political ones that are popping around, but let's say, all right, you have something about a border case. You can't just say, I believe in open borders or I don't believe in open borders. You can't do that. That's not what judges do. Judges look at the law. What was the law that was passed? What's the impact is it having? And where are these people and how are they being housed? The more information I can get, the better I can do my job. So as far as I'm concerned, if I don't have it when I get the papers, I ask for a hearing and make them orally argue. I can get supplemental paperwork. I can get as much information as I want. I can literally order people to say, I want to know how many people are held in confinement, how many children are held in confinement, how long have they been there? Like, I could say that if I had that case. And that more information helps to make those decisions.
Sure. In a related question too, Vanessa asks, when making a judicial decision and interpreting law, do you tend to favor a more activist approach or judicial restraint in your philosophy?
Yeah, it's funny because most judges at my level don't think of themselves as either like holding judicial restraint or being activists. I don't consider myself an activist judge because I'm the lowest judge on the totem pole. And so the low judges on the totem pole, we have precedent. We have to follow the law above me, right?
Sure.
Even if I disagree with it, that's what the law is. I can't overturn it as a district court judge. So as activist judges, you might see that more at the higher levels where they challenge an existing law. And then they have the kind of the authority to do that in a way that I don't have. I can't just say, well, I disagree with the Seventh Circuit or I disagree with the Supreme Court. They'd say, well, tough kid, see you later. I can, in my opinion, though, and I have done in certain opinions, I said, I'm following the law, but you've got to recognize that this law has this really strange adverse impact. And I'll point it out, like I'll give you an example of this.
Sure.
Years ago, there's a law about terrorist funding, and Americans who go overseas and are killed by terrorists like the Taliban or something like that. There's a rule of law that allows for people to seek redress from the Taliban, let's say, if they have fundings in the United States. So, like, imagine that it is the Taliban and they own stock in Target. And if you found out about, I'm just making this up, kids, don't believe this. if they found that money, you could go after it. To say, you killed my husband over in Afghanistan, and now I found out you have money in Target, and I want to go after it. But the weird thing about it is, it's the first person to find it. Okay, so it's kind of like the first person to sue on it. So I had a case where it was a whole bunch of people who were killed overseas, and they found some kind of holdings in something like AT&T, some kind of like major utility company, and it was millions, right? And all of these people wanted to get that money, but it was the first person that went in. And I was like, something. I said, this is what the law says, and he gets it. But it is an odd result that all of the people that are suffering from dead ones by a terrorist organization can't in some way seek redress from these same funds, right? I like pointed it out to say I didn't really understand it, but it is what it is, and that's about as much as I can do as a district court judge.
Is that in your opinion? Like, do you write this opinion, or is that just stated in court?
No, it's in my opinion. It's written. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next one comes from Melissa Ruiz. And there we go. Do you think that the framers' decision not to include a list of qualifications for judicial appointments has helped or hurt the judicial branch as a whole?
Oh, interesting. Probably it's been helpful. I mean, I think there is generally an understanding that a district court judge or a federal judge should have a minimum of 15 years of experience as a lawyer. And I think that if it were too restrictive, we would possibly see certain demographics not brought to the bench, right? We see that now at the highest level, but we do have different demographics being brought to the bench at my level. And so, I think that it's probably been a good thing not to have it defined too tightly.
Yeah, I think we were learning about Baker versus Carr, and how one of the Supreme Court justices was, I think he just had a high school education. I don't think he had even gone to college, but had, found his way into the judicial system as a lawyer. And the students were like, "What? That's crazy!" Like, we could justice. I'm like, "Yeah."
Yeah, and I think back in the day that was more realistic. It's harder now, and I think it's harder to find yourself in that. I think, like I said, there's pretty much every application that I've ever seen has always said that you should have 15 years experience as a trial lawyer. Well, I mean, and you saw how some of them who didn't have experience answered some goofy questions, during their hearings. Wasn't there some judge that didn't know what a motion in limine was or something, So that certainly, if there was going to be any kind of requirements, maybe some basic requirements like that, be a lawyer, right? Maybe have 15 years experience, something like that. But beyond that, I don't know if it would be too beneficial.
Yeah. Just a few more questions left. Maybe a handful. Valeria again asked, do you agree with Hamilton's preference for lifetime appointments to the federal judiciary? Especially as somebody who has a lifetime appointment.
Yeah, right. So the cool thing is, when I'm 65, I can retire, but I could stay on forever, which I think one side of that question is, should there be a retirement age?
Sure.
And, we're kind of seeing that a little bit more as people are living longer. As people are living longer, and dementia and some other mental health issues are coming along at a higher rate of speed with those older populations, I think that's something to revisit. I do think that appointed judges for a longer period of time, whether it's a lifetime or say 10 to 20 years, are good things. And I think they're better than elected judges, because the elected judges are running and they're literally going through a political party, and they are beholden to the people in many ways that are put on the bench, right? That got them to the bench. Whereas, I can strike down a Durbin, Obama, or Hastert. Hey, we had a judge who, sentenced Hastert after, he was in part of putting him on the bench, right? I mean, so that's something that should still be available and happen. And that happens in a system where you're looking at merit and you're being put on either for a lifetime appointment or for a significant period of time. I will tell you, federal judges, because we're generalists, the learning curve is huge. It's not like you get on the bench and you're a traffic judge and in 6 months you're golden. You know, like I said, I've been on the bench 15 years and I'm still coming across stuff that's new. So it's not realistic to say 5 years or 7 years or something like that. It would be more realistic to say something like 20 years. But maybe what we should really be saying is, if you're thinking about putting the floor, maybe you don't get on the district court bench until you're 40 or 35 or 40, and then you have a 20-year term, something like that, right? Or a bare minimum, maybe you say, listen, every year after 65, you have to take a mental health exam, to see if your cognitive ability is going well. Because we shouldn't have a lifetime appointment with somebody who is not capable of doing his or her job.
Sure. Next one comes from Alice and Ricardo. In class, we have talked about the different ways that an interest group can appeal to the court. And one way is through amicus curiae briefs. With this being said, as a judge, do you receive many briefs from interest groups for a case? And if you do, how impactful do you think that they really are in helping with your opinions?
I don't receive as many at the district court level, but I will tell you this: every year I sit on an appellate court at least once a year. So I sit with the 7th Circuit or the 9th Circuit at least once a year, and I've sat with the Federal Circuit before as well, and I find them helpful. I just find them very helpful. They are coming from a group that has boots on the ground, so to speak, with the issue, and they're very helpful. I mean, remember what I said about decision making: the more I can get, the better I feel. So if they want to give me information, that's fine. I have received them sometimes in a few of my cases where I'm having like a constitutional issue, like on a temporary restraining order or a preliminary injunction, and I always say fine. I have no problem receiving them. More information, the better, from as far as I'm concerned.
Have you ever found that they're overly biased or anything like that?
But you consider the source. It's like who's filing it, right? I mean, so if you're going to get, like in our immigration case, if you're going to get somebody who's anti-immigration reform, and they're sending theirs in, and then you're going to get immigration rights, you just know who they're coming from.
Sure.
And then you got it on both sides, and you've got a lot of information.
Yeah.
I don't mind. Yeah, I don't mind it at all.
Sure. Okay, next one is from Jasmine. In what ways do you or does the judicial branch in general interact with other branches of government? So the executive, legislative, bureaucracies, etc.
That's a great question. Not much. So what we do is we try to be independent, going back to your Hamilton quote, right? So if we're independent, when the executive branch is the closest branch that we interact with, and we interact with them because they're bringing criminal cases to us. So the federal prosecutors are from the executive branch, and they're bringing and so it's the law enforcement that are coming into our courtroom, are FBI, ATF, DEA, IRS, CIA, all of those types of cases are coming. All of those are our federal agents. So that's all executive branch. But normally when it comes to the other branch, the legislative branch, the only thing we're doing is we're striking down a law saying it's unconstitutional on its face or as applied, and we do that in our judicial ruling. And if we strike it down, it goes right back for the legislature to think about how they can fix it, right? If we are interacting with the executive branch, we are ruling on the arrests and the searches to make sure they're constitutional, right? And we're bringing them to jury trials. So we really operate independent of them, although they are part of our lives. Less so legislative than the executive, because the executive we see on a more regular basis with the criminal cases.
Sure. Have you ever had an issue with judicial implementation where you make a ruling, but let's say the executive branch refuses or is slow with implementing this law or enforcing it? Or is that your law, your opinion, for example? We were talking a little bit about Brown versus Board, how
right,
but it's not really enforced.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think that the answer to that is probably yes, and I'll give you an example of it that I just had. So in the state of Illinois, there is there are requirements on sex offenders,
Mhm.
okay, who are released from prison. They're restricted to living in certain areas. They're restricted to not being near playgrounds or daycare centers. They can't be released in a house where there's little kids. I mean, child sex offenders, I should say.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened in a case that I had recently, it was called Murphy v. Madigan, but I think now that it was Kwame Raoul, so it's been changed to Murphy v. Raoul. What happened is a bunch of sex offenders who are done with serving their time in prison can't get out because they can't find a place to live.
Ah.
Okay, and there's hundreds of them. Okay, so they sued, and I said, this is unconstitutional.
Hmm.
You have to change this. Like, you can't hold people because of the lack of a living place for them. So what the problem here is the laws are too restrictive for the sex offenders, and there's literally no place for them to go. So I can't change the law because I'm not a legislator, right? All I can do is make the finding that it's unconstitutional. So then what we did is we tried to work with the Department of Corrections and the state to, work it out so that these guys would be let out of prison in a certain fashion. It's not working. Like, they don't have enough ability to do it on their own without a change in the law. So then I have to hold them in contempt of my order, right? And then the contempt order goes to the legislator and says, and the contempt of the order could be like, you pay $1,000 a day until you fix this, right? So, and it's not necessarily their fault either, in the sense that the Department of Corrections, which is an executive branch department,
Hmm.
is following the laws that the legislature created. And if they follow the law themselves, they don't have a place for these guys to live. So that's when it's kind of like one branch tells the other branch, hey, this isn't working constitutionally. And then that branch that's being impacted says, hey, legislator, help me out here. I'm getting fined because of this.
Hmm.
That's the way it plays out.
Yeah. Great example. Thank you. Uh, so I think that kind of answers Damaris's question there about what ways can the judicial branch be checked or limited by the other two branches. Unless you have anything else you want to perhaps add on that.
The way my branch can be checked or limited, or the way other
Sure.
branch. My
The judicial branch can be checked or limited by.
Yeah. So it's a great question because I just gave you an example of how
Mhm.
I'm trying to go that way. But
Sure.
when they come back this way, I can't do anything on my own
Hmm.
without I mean, I can't change the law. I have to apply the law and the facts. So I'm completely limited to what is presented to me. I can't order, for example, I can't order the prisons to do my liking, because I think, here, I'll give you an example of that. When I was a federal prosecutor, I convicted a guy, and he was taking what is it called? A certain kind of drug that was for his ADHD. Okay, but it
Hmm.
was like an off-label drug. Okay, so he got put in prison prior to sentencing, and then the lawyers are getting ready to sentence him, but they're saying we're having so much trouble because he's not following us, like he's not communicating well, because the prison system took him off this drug. And so I say, well, let me find out why. And I, as the legislator, as at the time I was a prosecutor, I go to the head psychiatrist at the prison system and say, can't you put him on this drug? And they say, no, because we limit the kind of drugs that we give to the prisoners, and this is not on our formulary. Okay. So I, as the prosecutor from the executive branch, go to the judicial branch. I say to the judge, we have some trouble here, like he's not able to work well with this. I'm like being an advocate for the defense now, right? Well,
Hmm.
I need him to work with his attorneys. So the judge ordered the prison to put him on the medication, and the prison said, you can't order us to do that. because there's no unconstitutional harm in putting him on some other drug that's on our formulary. And they were right. And we had to wait until he managed to work with his new medications to be sentenced, because the judge was limited. And unless there was some constitutional violation, could not order the prison to give him that medicine.
Wow.
Interesting, right?
Yeah. I think there's two more questions here. This next one. Throughout our course, we've studied plenty, or we will be studying as well, many politically significant Supreme Court decisions like Baker versus Carr, McCulloch versus Maryland, Citizens United. I was just listening to a podcast yesterday. The students know how I love the podcasts. The Shelby County versus Holder, with the related to the Voting Rights Act. So that being said, which Supreme Court decisions, or do you have any Supreme Court decisions that you think are particularly important or relevant for Americans today?
Oh my goodness, I didn't even think of that question, because there's so many different ones in different areas. Oh my goodness. All right, I'm gonna tell you that your your Brown versus Board of Education is, one of the seminal ones to be thinking about, which goes to the concept of when does the Supreme Court say, hey, we got it wrong, right? But I'll tell you the cases, and I don't know them off the top of my head, but I can send them to you afterwards, which I think are really critical right now.
Sure.
In the last few terms, we're definitely seeing the Supreme Court moving towards saying that we cannot be incarcerating people that are not mentally well enough to be incarcerated, right? And we're seeing it in different ways. We're seeing it both in like the states that have charging people as adults, right? And other times when we see whether somebody else was what their IQ was, mentally fit to stand trial. Those are pretty revolutionary, and they're going to change. It's a much more enlightened way of looking at criminal defendants and looking at the development of the brain. I think that's a pretty revolutionary area that we haven't heard about too much. I think that, the way that marriage has been defined and the same-sex marriage case is certainly critical in our time, as to understanding the way our values are reflected and how that impacts things like health insurance and living and just your life choices. I think those are really critical. I think that any issue that ever brings up the equal rights of women is going to be really critical. The fact that, we are celebrating the rights of women to vote, the anniversary of that this year, but we still don't have an equal rights amendment is kind of crazy, right?
Sure.
Those are the ones that I think are the most critical. And I'm not the best with names of cases. I always have to look back at them. But those are the three areas: the criminal area one with mental health, the personal life issue one when it comes to just the choices that we make as human beings. And then thirdly, I think the way that we view women and the way that women's independence and abilities to be treated equally with equal pay, equal representation, et cetera. Those are three areas I think are ones to watch for us in the court.
Good, thank you. Our last question is from Jocelyn, who asks, do you find that being a legal expert on child exploitation and human trafficking has facilitated or added value to your job as a district court judge? If yes, in what ways?
Oh, that's nice. So my life is like, I have a huge pro bono life. I teach at University of Chicago. I teach at Yale last year, Northwestern, and all over the world and all over the states about human trafficking. I thought when I became a judge, I would probably have to give that up. Because I didn't want to be, biased in any way. But I have found that I have found a niche where advancing the rights of victims and having training judges as to understand the unique victimization of the vulnerable people in trafficking is very acceptable position to have as a judge. It has enhanced my work tremendously. The only thing it doesn't enhance is my sleep.
I can imagine, yeah.
And maybe my and maybe my time with Preston, because I'm constantly running around the world, and he's
Mhm.
constantly. My grandchildren have a map of the globe on the wall, and they put pins in it, and it says at the top, "Where in the world is Nana?" Because I'm always running around. And so this strange time where we're all in our houses, we're actually enjoying the time together and reflecting a bit on our blessings, right?
Mhm.
But this area of law is it's really it's bigger than any of us really understand. I think as individuals, it is, we're talking 40 million human beings each year trafficked. We're talking about billions of dollars in money to the traffickers, and all we're really talking about as young, Jesuit trained people is the vulnerable are being abused by those with power. And they're doing so through labor and through sexual exploitation. And I can't think of a better thing to be spending my free time on than trying to help those people who can't help themselves, right?
Mhm.
So I know that it's been tiring in a lot of ways because it's a devastating thing to constantly be focused on. But I get tremendous reward going over to another country and seeing, like, training a judge and training a prosecutor and then coming back the following year and they've had their first federal prosecution, right? Those two judges, the people in the training have done it. I mean, that's beautiful, right? They've sent the message that they understand, and they've saved maybe some child from, a horrific life. So it's, to me, something that I am really passionate about, and something that I know will continue on even long after my judicial position, because I care that much about it. And I hope it makes me a better judge, in that I've seen such sadness around the world that makes me just realize how lucky we all are here.
Mhm.
And sadness in our own lives in the United States.
Mhm.
There's a lot of really suffering young people, so I try hard to help them out.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know I really appreciate hearing from you. I'm sure that the students do. And yeah, thank you again for helping to make this reality, despite all the other issues we have going on right now.
Well, as you go on in the future, if you need more help and you want to switch up a topic, I'd be happy to help you and
Sure.
do it again. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Have a great day, everyone. Take care. Bye
You
bye.
too. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. I think we're good.
All right.
All right. Thank you again.
Okay. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.